I don't have much time. On the cold floor of this prison cell, I find myself desperate, scribbling this letter, not to simply recount the events that have led up to this, but as a warning to you all. The stories you have read, all the reports on the news, barely even scratched the surface of what we encountered that night. I turned myself in, not because of guilt or because I was trying to escape, but because it felt like the only option in order to escape whatever this thing was. I would much rather be writing this letter to Diego and Lucia to send them assurance of my safety and see if they even made it. However, the mysterious power outages, the noises at night, the shadows that are seen walking among us, it's become clear that this thing has actually followed us here. I beg you, or anyone that finds this letter, to share it, especially online, on TikTok, YouTube, or any other place where people might actually believe in these things. Share it in places where people are asking questions. And I beg you, please, take this serious, because this isn't just a story. It's a dire warning. The cold metal floor of the Suburban pressed against me. I could feel the shaking and the noises of it in my bones. I was sitting in the back, between a father, Diego, and his young daughter, Lucia. The sounds of the engine, combined with the scraping noises of the tires against the gravel, filled the silence. In between all the noises, the dim light of the vehicle's interior showed Diego's face. He leaned in closer to me, making sure his daughter couldn't hear. "Are you sure about this?" Diego asked with a tone of anxiety and hope. His eyes, though, showed concern. I nodded, trying to show him confidence in my ability to get them across. However, inside of me thoughts of doubt existed. Memories of the past, both successful and disastrous, flashed through my mind, reminded me of the weight, the responsibility, and the risk. Their desperate eyes looked to me for hope. They had paid $10,000 each for this, a price that I knew too well. Most people think that as a coyote, all that money is for me, when actually, the money gets divided among many hands. First, there was Maria in Mexico. Her job was essential, to find people like Diego and Lucia, desperate enough to pay and believe. And of course, people were everywhere, so she was the first one to get her cut of the pie, you can say. Then, the driver Carlos, he was the one taking the biggest risk, the one who would face jail time if he was caught. Well, we would all face jail time if caught, but he would be considered the primary smuggler, with us acting as victims. He knew all the landscapes and the roads very well. We met a few years back, but we didn't go into business until around a year ago. He had the nerves and the courage. He knew all the roads to take, the shortcuts, what to avoid, and what to do when we came across a detour. And of course, Carlos came with a price tag. Every plan, every decision, every move was well crafted. Crossing the border wasn't just about getting up and going. It was a game of chess, one where everyone had its role, and our best piece was our inside man, Miguel. Miguel was different than the others, a border patrol agent who still remembered his roots, you can say, where he came from, and the struggles of his family a generation or two before him. The system was his day job, but by night, he would, quote-unquote, help those who are trying to find better opportunities. I say it this way because, as you all know, people in life just don't help you freely. There is always something in exchange. And so Miguel would take his cut as well. And sometimes there were others too, agents who we would turn a blind eye, getting their own payment as well. You see, decades ago, things were simple. Border Patrol wasn't as advanced as they are now. Drones, which now patrol the skies, could see just about everything. And with technology advancing so quickly, there also came more hoops to jump through, more hands reaching out, more people wanting their own piece of the pie as well. The checkpoint lights of the border seemed to welcome us as we approached, the huge lights slowing anyone to a stop and helping break the darkness of the night. The gate ahead stood as the final barrier to cross into Texas. As always, Miguel knew our deal and what day of the week we would come by. He was manning the controls as well. He recognized our approach, signaling us to pull up ahead with a friendly wave. He peeked inside the Suburban, and he said, "So there's 2 today," he remarked with a smile. "No, pues, you're consistent, my friend, and sure it gets to the right place." He then signaled to his colleagues, and the massive gate bar slowly opened. As we drove ahead slowly, Miguel yelled at us to stop. Carlos then slowed the Suburban to a stop again. I rolled down the window and said, "Hey, ¿qué pasa? What happened?" Miguel then said, "Get out of the car and come to the front, both of you." For a split second as Miguel yelled at us, some thoughts were flashing through my mind. Was this the moment Miguel turned? Over the years, the risk of somebody betraying you was always there, especially with the pressure that everyone and the Border Patrol agents were under. One could never be sure. Carlos and I looked at each other nervously. Had Miguel finally decided to play it straight and turn us in? The nervousness grew as we exited the vehicle. The dry landscape around us was illuminated by the moon and stars, making everything around us appear even more isolated. The only sources of light were from the Border Patrol checkpoint. The floodlights and the distant sounds of generators and the occasional radio were the only sounds that interrupted this environment. Walking towards the front of the vehicle where Miguel was, I noticed his face was showing no emotion. And then, he finally broke into a chuckle. "Gotta keep you on your toes, amigo," he said. "Always making me sweat a little before letting me through, huh?" I said. Miguel was one of those jokesters who like to pull pranks and, as he said, keep us on our toes. I'm not sure if he did it on purpose or to throw his colleagues off. For example, one time he made everyone I was transporting to get out of the truck and quote-unquote search us. Then, Miguel's demeanor then shifted to a more serious tone. "Hey, listen, before I forget, there's something I think you should know. There's been some strange things happening lately." I stayed silent and nodded my head, urging him to continue. "It's the disappearances," he said in a low voice. "Whole entire groups have been vanishing. We had a family we let through earlier this week, and just last night, we found them." I held my breath. "What do you mean found them?" Miguel hesitated for a moment. "They were dead, but it wasn't like any scene I ever come across. The bodies, they were mangled, twisted in ways that don't seem natural. Their eyes were missing. It looked like some kind of animal attack, but it's nothing I had ever seen. The strange thing is, no bullet holes, no knife cuts. It's as if their bodies were broken and twisted everywhere. Even some limbs were ripped apart, and others twisted in ways I had never seen." I felt a shiver run down my spine. "Do you think it's something to do with the cartels?" He shrugged. "Could be, but even the cartels have a specific way to their madness. It's different. Like, I'm not sure, maybe someone or something, not human. It's weird. Just keep your eyes open and stay safe out there." I nodded. "Alright, you're good to go ahead," Miguel said. "But don't forget it." Climbing back into the Suburban, I got into the passenger seat, while Diego and Lucia stayed in the back. I could sense their fear radiating from their looks of concern. As far as Miguel's mention of it, I knew he was talking about the payment for the 2 passengers. Yet my mind kept circling back to his warning. Most stories and crimes from the border are always linked to the cartels, but the way Miguel had described this situation, it was disturbing. I used to work with other coyotes, but as time went by, I realized just how dirty this business could be when it's in the wrong hands. Their methods were evil, just thinking about the money, not the well-being of the people we were transporting, cramming people into the backs of the trucks, trailers like livestock, often without water. If they were pulled over, it was every man for himself. The ones who had taken the responsibility for those lives would bolt, leaving scared families to fend for themselves. You hear reports all the time. I think it was a few years ago when Houston police found a huge rig with about 100 immigrants trapped inside. Of course, we knew who it was and who did it, but it just shows you that once you get paid in advance, they don't care about you. There is one incident that stands out. Halfway through a journey, a young boy fell ill, most likely from the extreme heat and lack of water. He slowed the group down. The other coyotes with whom I was working with back then decided he was a liability. They actually wanted to leave him and his mom behind in the middle of nowhere. The argument became heated, and I stepped in, managing to persuade the group to let them stay. However, that incident was the turning point for me. It was no longer just about the money. It's more of sleeping without the guilt of things that you could have done in the past. They would abandon families halfway into the road. A father, a mother, a daughter, or son. It didn't even matter. If someone held us back, they would just be left alone. And well, this approach troubled me. They had already received their payment, and to them, anyone slowing the process was just added baggage. I had seen fathers get separated from their families, mothers left crying for their children. These were humans, and for them to turn a blind eye was just wrong. I decided to break away from this group of coyotes. It wasn't an easy decision, and it came with risk. Going without them meant that I had to build a new network, find people, and operate discreetly to avoid drawing attention from my former partners. But my guiding became clear: ensure the safety and well-being of every person under my care. Over time, I developed a reputation for fairness. Families trusted me to get them across because they had heard stories of my dedication. I may have charged less than the others, but I slept better at night, knowing that I wasn't sacrificing human lives. Furthermore, I would move people in much smaller groups of only couples or small families. The road was still dangerous, but now I had a plan. I was determined to make every journey as safe as possible. If a situation got risky at some points, we would stay in place for days until it was clear. I would always give the family the most a week to cross. If we didn't make it, I would rather return the payment than to put ourselves and them at risk. However, Miguel wasn't the last piece. The most significant cut went to Bill, a Native American who owned a vast, secluded farmland on the Texas border in Big Bend. His land was the safe passage, the bridge between dreams and reality. He demanded a steep price for turning a blind eye, for sheltering the hopeful souls on their journey. From the $20,000 I collected, only a fraction truly belonged to me. It was a risky venture, but to me, it was worth it. After successfully crossing the border from Ojinaga, the road ahead seemed both promising. The landscape transformed quickly, leaving behind the desert open landscapes and trading it for the beauty of the Big Bend region. This huge wilderness area seemed like the perfect cover. Our plan was to avoid the border towns and the watchful eyes of Border Patrol by cutting through the heart of Big Bend National Park. This road would lead us straight to Plata, Texas, where Bill was waiting. As we drove through, the landscape began to shift, a dense, small woodland between the mountains. This now meant that we were in the heart of Big Bend National Park. The natural beauty surrounding us was a testament to the park's untouched wilderness. However, with this beauty came an eerie silence, broken only by the sounds of our vehicle and the occasional rustling of leaves or distant animal calls. As Carlos drove ahead through the forest area, the dim glow of the dashboard was lighting up the interior. Carlos, always running his mouth, had been rarely quiet for a while. I took a deep breath and broke the silence. You remember what Miguel mentioned about those bodies they found in areas like this? I said, trying to bring in a little humor. Carlos took a deep breath. Yeah, even I heard rumors back in Ojinaga, but I brushed them off. I thought they were just that, rumors. However, I seen rumors that some of the local ranchers have stumbled upon bodies not too far from here. Not just any bodies, but ones that, well, they weren't right. I frowned. What do you mean? Torn apart. Some of the older folks in town were saying something about old legends, things that roamed the woods, especially near the border, Carlos said. You're talking about a chupacabra, aren't you? Carlos hesitated, then nodded, among other things and rumors. But whatever it was, it has people scared. Even the bravest of coyotes are steering clear of certain roads from what I heard. I never encountered anything around here though. Man, why did you have to bring up those stories now? This place is already scary enough. I smirked, just trying to lighten up the mood. He chuckled nervously. Well, it's not working, carnal. As we were driving, every so often, the sounds of birds, I guess, echoed all around us. All the noises of the nightly critters could be heard with the steady hum of the Suburban's engine, until suddenly, the engine sound turned into a sputter, groaned, and then after one last cough, fell silent. We knew that even though we were far from the border, we weren't safe. The 100-mile border law meant that patrols could stop and search any vehicle within that radius, hoping to catch people just like us. As the vehicle came to a stop, I looked back at Diego and Lucia. I could see Diego's grip on his daughter strong. Again, I could see fear in their faces. Carlos then said, "Let's see what's wrong." Grab the lights out the glove compartment. I grabbed them and gave one to Carlos, and then the two of us stepped out into the darkness. The night was dark, with only the lights of the stars and the moon above. There were no street lights here, no signs of people. We were alone. I held a flashlight while Carlos popped the hood, revealing a bunch of hoses, wires, and metal. As he started moving stuff around and trying to figure out the issue, I would try to crank the ignition, hoping for some sign of life. But the Suburban refused to turn on. Feeling the weight of the situation, I approached the back to reassure Diego and Lucia. "We'll figure it out," I whispered, my voice being a little shaky despite the situation. Lucia was holding a small doll, her source of comfort throughout this journey. As I walked back to the front of the vehicle where Carlos was, my feet started crunching on the dry gravel. I stopped as memories flooded back. I thought about all those who venture into these same fields, driven by the promise of a better life. I stared into the surrounding darkness. It felt pretty cool, even though the temperature was still pretty high. As I was thinking, that's when I heard it. A faint whisper. It was coming from the tree line just a few yards from where we had stopped. "Help," it said. The voice of a young boy, fragile and on the verge of breaking. My heart raced as I tried to place the direction of the voice, but I froze, every instinct urging me to dismiss it as a figment of my imagination. But it sounded so real. With my flashlight pointing down, casting a small circle of light on the ground, I slowly raised it, allowing the beam to cut through the darkness and bring light to the edge of the woods. But there was nothing there. just trees, their leaves rustling gently in the night breeze. The sound, the voice had faded, but I felt shivers down my spine. I took a deep breath, trying to rationalize the experience. Maybe being exhausted and the stress of the journey were getting to me. Maybe it was just the wind playing tricks, but I couldn't shake off the feeling that I had actually heard something. Actually heard someone, that is. Nervously, I made my way back to the front of the Suburban, where Carlos was still trying to figure out the engine's issue. As I approached him, I could hear him saying words under his breath, cursing at the vehicle. "Carlos," I began, my voice low and cautious. "Did you, hear that just now?" He paused, looking up from the engine with a confused look. Hear what?" "A voice," I replied, swallowing the saliva in my throat. "From the woods. It was somebody saying help me." Carlos stared at me for a moment. The thought of hearing a voice was both scary and unexplainable. "Ya no andes chingando, cabrón. Stop fucking around, dude," he said. We both stood still in silence, with only the calls of the night critters and the trees making sounds. The weight of our situation, combined with this experience, made the night feel even more scary. While waiting for the engine to respond, Carlos and I leaned on the vehicle's frame, both of us trying to plan out our next step. "Well, Bill's farm isn't too far from here," Carlos said, wiping the sweat from his face, even though it wasn't that hot. "If the Suburban doesn't start, we could possibly make it in foot in a couple of hours." I nodded, processing the idea, as it was our only option. With a heavy sigh, I made my way to the back of the Suburban, deciding to discuss the possible plan with Diego and Lucia. As I was walking back, I kept looking at the tree line to see if that voice would call out again. I'm not sure what I was looking for, but even if I did see something, I didn't know what I was gonna do. It didn't help that everything was pitch black, as I could only distinguish a few things because of the moon, but overall, everything was dark. I found Diego and his daughter together, their eyes showing a mix of hope and nervousness. "Hey, listen," I began. "If we can't get the vehicle going, we might have to walk the rest of the way to Bill's farm. It's not too far. However, we would have to cross through this small patch of woods right here." Diego sat still for a while, and then he nodded, bringing Lucia close to him. I could see the weight of responsibility that he carried for his daughter, trying to protect her and provide comfort. I continued, "It's gonna be a long walk, but I promise you, it's safe." After talking with Diego about the plan and trying to make sure that they were okay with it, I turned my attention back to the hood of the car and to Carlos. But as I approached the front, the engine was quiet, the hood was still up, but Carlos, who was just there moments ago, was now gone. A rush of panic went through my whole body. The area was silent, except for the distant chirping of crickets. This is the reason drivers get paid, I thought to myself, trying to use my sense of humor to overcome the fear. Every story, every warning about the dangers of these roads rushed back to me. "Carlos," I called out. The weight of silence bore down on me, making my voice actually sound low. I took a few steps in front of the Suburban, shining my flashlight around. There was no trace of him. I circled the vehicle, praying that maybe he had just gone off to relieve himself, or that he was trying to find a better view, to see which way we could go. But there was nothing, no sign of him. My mind started to race to all things. Did he go to find help? Maybe he heard something, or saw a patrol and decided to hide. The possibilities seemed endless, and none of them were reassuring. That's when I felt a chill run down my spine, as I thought back to that voice from the tree line. However, pushing aside the fear that I had, I knew I had to do something. I started to shine my flashlight everywhere, sweeping the area, looking for any sign of him. "Carlos!" I called out again, louder this time, hoping that he would answer. Suddenly, from deep within the trees, I heard a faint chuckle, followed by a voice that I instantly recognized. "Hey, over here! We need to cut through here. It's the fastest way to Bill's farm." As the voice of Carlos came from the tree line, a confused feeling and concern gripped me. Why did he venture off without us? What could have possibly made him go disappear into the dark woods? Without a word, that is. I squinted my eyes, trying to make out more than just a faint shadow of Carlos against the trees, but the trees and the night sky covered him. The weight of bearing bad news was never easy, but I had no choice but to tell Diego that we would have to walk. As I turned, I was met with an unexpected sight, causing me to leap back in shock. Diego was standing there, inches from me, with Lucia clutching his hand. My heart raced, and a rush of adrenaline left me. "Geez, Diego, don't sneak up on me like that, man," I said, with my voice slightly shaky from the sudden surprise. Diego raised an eyebrow, a mix of concern on his face. "Hey, sorry," he replied with a grin. "Didn't mean to scare you." "It's alright, just give me a bit of warning next time, alright?" I nodded towards the direction of the trees where the voice of Carlos had come from. "Hey Diego, Carlos has gone up ahead, trying to sound as confident as possible." Diego, with a confused look. "But why? Without telling us a thing, why would he do that?" "I'm not sure, man," I replied, "but I heard his voice from the trees right there. I know he's waiting, so we should hurry up and regroup with him. Bill's farm isn't far, and we can make it if we move quickly. Let's go get the backpacks from the sub, and then we'll start walking towards the woods." As we went back to the Suburban, everything just seemed off. As we started walking a few feet to where I had seen Carlos by the tree line, that's when I heard it, another voice. "Hey, ¿a dónde van? Where y'all going?" It was unmistakably the voice of Carlos again, but this time it was filled with confusion. I turned sharply in the direction of the second voice, my flashlight revealing the familiar face of Carlos, looking just as confused as I was. As I looked back towards the tree line where the first voice had come from, there was nothing. No sound, no movement, just the stillness of the night. Diego stepped in front of me, with his voice shaky. "What's going on?" Carlos, now clearly behind us standing by the hood of the Suburban, looked at the tree line with a suspicious look. "Hey, I just went to the trees to take a leak. I heard someone call out, and I thought you guys were leaving without me." The confusion hung heavy in the night air. My heart started to race, trying to process what just happened. "Hey, get back in the vehicle," I said, and my voice mixed with fear and urgency. I heard the voice of Carlos, coming from that way that we were just gonna go. Carlos interrupted, his voice with concern. "Hey, I wasn't anywhere near until now. We need to get out of here before somebody finds us." Nodding in agreement, I said, "Alright, let's all stick together. Nobody leaves the vehicle. And Carlos, if you think you can fix it, let's get out of here as quickly as possible." "I think I know what's wrong with it. I was thinking about it when I was out there taking a leak," said Carlos. As I rushed Diego and his daughter to get back inside, Carlos got underneath the hood and told me to try to start cranking. I then got inside and saw Diego and Lucia in the very back, looking nervous. I cranked the vehicle and the engine came to life, breaking the long silence that was around us. A wave of relief flooded through me as I realized that we wouldn't have to walk through the woods. Carlos emerged from under the hood, his hands smeared with grease, but with a smile on his face. "You're gonna find this crazy, but it was a loose wire. It should hold up now though," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. We stepped to the front of the vehicle, and I asked Carlos if this should hold up at least until we get to Bill's farm. He said it should, but we'll have to look into it as soon as we can. As we closed the hood of the sub, that's when we saw it. There was a dark figure, standing along the shadows of the tree line. A chill ran down my spine as the silhouette began to get revealed more, and just like that, a voice echoed, calling out, "Help me." Carlos and I stared at each other, without saying a word, driven by fear. We sprinted back inside the Suburban. As we got inside, my heart started to pound against my rib cage. Carlos floored the gas, but I couldn't help myself. I turned my head to see through the passenger mirror. The figure was distorted, and it was starting to move. Actually, no, it was twisting, as it attempted to walk, with its form growing smaller in the distance as we drove away. "That fucking voice, Carlos," I whispered, trying to make sure that Diego and Lucia didn't listen. "It's that same fucking voice I was telling you about." Carlos glanced over at me, and with a concerned look in his eyes. "I heard it as well, when I was taking a piss. Who knows what the fuck is going on here?" Breaking the tension, I turned to face Diego and Lucia. "Bill's farm is just ahead," I reassured them, trying my best to make sure they didn't question our looks of fear in our faces. The good thing is that the windows in the back of the Suburban were dark, so I know it was impossible for them to see out back. "How much longer till we get to Bill's farm, Carlos?" "About 20 more minutes if this damn sub doesn't break down again," he responded. Memories of Bill surfaced, recalling our first meeting at a cultural festival in Texas, an event filled with tradition, dance, and music that celebrated Native heritage. A moment where cultures intersected, bridging gaps and understanding each other. I met Bill during one of these cultural festivals in the heart of Texas. The festival aimed to showcase a fusion of traditions, from native dances and Mexican mariachi music to all types of stuff crafted by natives and Mexicans. Bill actually had a stall there, demonstrating traditional Native American weaving techniques. The fabrics told stories with patterns and colors, speaking stories of their ancestors and the land they called home. Next to him was a group of people performing a traditional Mexican folk dance. The two cultures, so different, yet with so much in common, was fascinating to learn about both. I approached where Bill was at, drawn by a design that, to my surprise, had patterns that I had seen back in Mexico. We began to talk, and I learned that some patterns were universal, representing themes like life, death, and nature, which actually resonates across cultures. Bill, with his welcoming demeanor, expressed interest in my Mexican roots. As our conversation deepened, I learned about the expanse of land that belonged to his family for generations. I shared stories of my hometown in Mexico, the traditions, the festivals, and all the challenges that we faced. Another common thing was that Bill was interested in creatures of lore and legends, some of which had roots in Native American stories passed down through generations. He spoke about a Wendigo, a creature born from greed and transformed into an evil spirit. I, in turn, would tell stories from my hometown, La Llorona, the weeping woman who wandered the rivers, searching for her children, La Lechuza, the witch, El Nagual, the shapeshifter, and even El Chupacabra, the fierce blood-sucking creature, which I will actually tell you about if I have time later on. However, what caught my attention the most were the dream catchers that were designed to ward off evil spirits and apparently offer protection. Bill started speaking passionately about these items, explaining how some were made using traditional methods passed down through generations in his Native American community. "You see, these are not just decorative items," he said, holding up a dream catcher. "They're instruments to protect you. This dream catcher, for example, is said to protect your sleep from nightmares and negative energy." I found myself fascinated, not just by the items he sold, but by the stories and traditions they represented. So through our discussions, Bill often talked about more intricate and custom pieces he had back at his home. "You should come by sometime. I have pieces at home that I believe you'll find more fascinating," he said. Taking him up on the offer, a few weeks later, I found myself visiting Bill's farm. The property was a testament to his heritage, and his deep-rooted connection to the land. It was here that our conversations grew, leading to confidence and deeper insights about our own journeys. When I first set foot on Bill's farm, I was immediately surprised by how big it was. The land was stretching out as far as the eye could see. Bill actually gave me a tour of the property, pointing out the different sections, and eventually taking me to a secluded work area. This space, covered by all the trees, was where he crafted his items and kept his collection. After this, he invited me to the main house. The walls were lined with his handcrafted artifacts. Bill offered me a beverage. We settled into a comfortable conversation. "You know," he began, sipping from his cup, "from the discussions we've been having, I sense you have a rich history and culture behind you. Have you ever thought of crafting and possibly selling artifacts?" I paused for a second, taking his words in, and with a deep breath, I said, "Actually, Bill, I'm already involved in a different kind of business. What I would like to discuss is the possibility of using this land of yours as part of that business." Bill took a moment, processing what I had just offered. He studied me for a long moment, the weight of my request evident in the air between us. Finally, he broke the silence. "This land is sacred to me and my ancestors. It's a piece of our history, a testament to our survival and culture. If I let you use it, I need you to keep your word that you'll respect the traditions and use it only for good intentions." Bill leaned back on his chair. "For every person you bring through this land," he began, "I will need a certain percentage. This land isn't just a piece of property. It's a part of my tradition, of my ancestors. Using it this way comes with its own cost and risk." We shook hands, sealing our agreement. As I made my way to the door, ready to leave, something caught my attention. There was a streak of what seemed to be black dirt or black dust lining the door frame. Curious, I pointed towards it. "Hey Bill, what's this for?" Bill hesitated for a split second. Then he said, "That's black ash." Then, in a low voice, "That's to ward off yenaglooshi." His simple answer sent a shiver down my spine. I didn't ask him who yenaglooshi is, but I figured it was some kind of spirit, similar to the other ones that he had told me about when I was asking him about the dream catchers. And that's how me and Bill became partners. I had been using his farm for a while, and as a bonus, he treated us like royalty when we were there at the farm. He got along with everybody. After about 30 minutes and seeing familiar landmarks appearing, I realized we were approaching Bill's farm. As Carlos drove the Suburban down the driveway leading to the main house, the land was very calm. Instead of animals grazing, the goats and sheep were laying dormant, apparently in a deep sleep. The closer we got to the main house, the more a creepy feeling came over us. The whole house was completely dark, no light filtering from any window. All the normal farm sounds were missing. Carlos brought the Suburban to a stop and said, "Something doesn't feel right," he whispered. I tried to remain optimistic and said, "Maybe Bill just went to sleep early." That's when Carlos pointed to the front door. It was slightly open, swaying gently with the breeze. "Or maybe something's wrong," he said. Suddenly, the stillness was shattered by a distant scream. I reached and grabbed the flashlights. "We need to check this out," I said. Carlos then nodded. As we both got off, I approached the back door and told Diego, "Hey man, we're gonna go inside and see where Bill is at. Stay here and we'll be right back." He simply nodded, still holding Lucia in his arms. As we approached the front door, I noticed signs of a struggle. A broken lamp was laying on the ground, the glass reflecting the moonlight tools and a basket of veggies laid on the ground as well. As we entered the house, the beam of the flashlight revealed the living room in a mess. Chairs were overturned, and a framed picture of Bill with his family was laying broken on the floor. Carlos called out, "Bill, are you here?" His voice echoed through the silent house. Suddenly, from upstairs, we heard a small whimper, followed by a hushed voice murmuring. Drawn towards the sound, we made our way up the creaking staircase. The voice was growing louder, and as we reached the top of the stairs, we saw Bill. He was seated in a circle of what looked to be salt, surrounded by lit candles, holding onto a worn-out book, his face pale, looking up, revealing a mixture of relief and fear. It looked like he was praying. He then looked at us and said, "The movement of people across the land, especially during the night, has disturbed the resting places of such things." His face then turned towards the window opposite of us, where I saw a shadow quickly move out of sight, and then he looked back at us and whispered, "Yenaglooshi is here." The voice of Bill echoed in the room as he said, "Yenaglooshi is here." We looked around. The wind outside also seemed to pick up. With confused thoughts filling my head, I took a step. "Bill," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "What's going on? What the hell are you talking about?" Bill's face remained fixed, but then his expression started changing. "It's not just a story, not just a legend. It's real," he said with his voice trembling. "Because of our actions, we have awoken an ancient presence. We're all doomed." I turned to look at Carlos. His face was pale, and his eyes were wide. He then said, "Let's get out of here. Vámonos." Glancing towards the exit, "This guy's lost it. He's gone crazy." However, Bill started shaking his head slowly. "Running won't save you," he said, reaching beside him to reveal a pile of small necklaces that looked similar to dream catchers. "These," he began, "these are the only things that might keep us safe, even if it's just for a little bit." He reached out his hand for me and Carlos to take one each, telling us to wear them. As I adjusted mine, trying to understand everything that was going on, I saw a shadow from the corner of my eye. My heart raced as I saw something standing by the window. It was tall and just standing still. It seemed to be watching us. All the candles that were surrounding Bill started to flicker, making the figure appear even more sinister. The wind continued blowing outside, and the farmhouse started to creak. Bill, noticing our horrified stares, turned to see the figure as well. He then started whispering something towards it, almost mumbling under his breath. As the last word came out of his mouth, the room grew cold, and in a split second, the figure at the window vanished. Carlos was the first to move. "Vámonos, let's go," he urged, heading towards the door. Bill, who was holding onto a worn-out book, quickly followed him, and I was right behind them. But just as we neared the exit, a loud crash echoed behind us, causing all three of us to freeze in our tracks. It was the sound of shattering glass, like a window breaking. I couldn't help but look back. The source of the noise was now clear. Through the broken window of the room that we had just left, a figure emerged from the room. It was huge, almost like a coyote. Its form was distorted, limbs twisted. The fur that covered it was patchy, revealing raw skin underneath. Its eyes were glowing an eerie yellow. A surge of adrenaline came and pushed me to run outside. The distance to the Suburban seemed endless. My thoughts raced to Diego and Lucia, who were still inside the Suburban. Were they safe? Or were they even aware of the things that were going on. As we left the farmhouse, the darkness of the night was broken by the lights of the Suburban. To my surprise, Diego and Lucia were standing outside the vehicle. Their faces were full of confusion and fear. "Hey, get back in!" I screamed at them, with my voice echoing. Without thinking twice, they scrambled into the very back of the Suburban, while Carlos, taking the lead, jumped into the driver's seat. I slid into the passenger side, while Bill took a seat in the middle row. Carlos slammed his foot on the gas pedal, shooting the vehicle ahead. The tires kicked up dust and gravel as we made our desperate escape. As the Suburban raced away, I couldn't resist the urge to glance back at the farmhouse. I looked over at the passenger mirror and saw, there, against the moonlight, stood a creature in the doorway, a twisted coyote-like figure. Those yellow eyes again seemed to glow in the night, watching us, yet it made no move to come towards us. It just stood there, and I swear, I saw this thing raise a limb, almost as to wave goodbye. As we sped down the driveway, everyone was shaken. The fear was evident in their eyes. As the headlights lit up the path ahead, the sight that met our eyes was one that I will never forget. Bill's livestock, which earlier had seemed to be resting, was now revealed by the light that they had been decapitated. Their lifeless bodies were laying all around, heads missing from each one of them, legs missing on others, and torsos cut in half. Bill, his voice breaking with fear, managed to speak. "It did this. Yenaglooshi. It's sending us a message." I turned my head to look at him. He then started to reach into his pocket, pulling out several more necklaces. "You two, put these on. It might be our only defense." Diego and Lucia, who were still processing everything that just happened, I know they were still somewhat confused, so I simply told them to, "Dice que se pongan los collares, por favor. Please put on the necklaces." They both then quickly took the necklaces from Bill and put them on. The Suburban's tires crunched against the gravel beneath. I gripped the dashboard tightly, my knuckles turning white from the pressure. Glancing briefly at Carlos, he kept his eyes trained on the road. I turned to face Bill. "Alright, Bill, what the fuck is going on?" Bill, who was just staring down, looked up at me. He raised a worn book he had been holding all this time, and with the light of the dashboard slightly showing his eyes, he said, "Long ago, before these lands were marked by fences or roads, this land was sacred, alive with ancient ceremonies by my ancestors. The Begais, my forefathers, were drawn to this place and soon encountered its guardian, yenaglooshi. These grounds echo with chants, were painted with spiritual dances. The Begais forged a pact with the yenaglooshi. We would dwell here, thrive from the land's gifts, but in turn, we vowed to never disturb the sacred spaces that the spirits have called home. It was a pact of respect, of understanding. In this mutual agreement, my ancestors flourish. The land was kind to them." He paused for a moment, looking out of the window. But as with most stories, time blurred the lines between real and fake. By the time I was a child, these stories were just not fireside stories, legends that lost meaning with each retelling. Turning his attention back to us, then you two came along. Seeing potential in these lands, you began bringing people across, trampling upon promises made ages ago. Every step they took, every night they traveled, the land was disturbed. The land, the Begais, had vowed to protect. Each night, as individuals were guided across these grounds, they disturbed the ancient spirits and the resting place of yenaglooshi. His voice grew soft, almost a whisper. I began to notice, feel the changes around. The land seemed to cry out, its once welcoming embrace, now cold. Digging through the books of my family's history, I discovered everything, and I realized what we had done. He pointed around with his hands. All the items you saw in the room back at the farmhouse, the salt, and the words I was saying, the candles, were my desperate attempts, my plea to yenaglooshi, to tell it that we didn't mean harm, to ask him for forgiveness. With this, Bill looked down and stood quiet. The voice of Carlos trembled slightly as he spoke. Look, we got Diego and Lucia with us. We can't just keep driving. We need to do something. Being out here in the dark isn't helping either. Border patrol could be anywhere. We need to find a secure spot. I nodded. I was struggling to believe anything that was happening or going on. Yet I know what we saw back at the farmhouse. These necklaces, Bill, I began, glancing at the charm around my neck. Are they going to keep that creature away from us? Bill looked up at me, his eyes filled with both hope and doubt. They are simply crafts that I used to make that my father taught me. I read in this book that they are used to ward off evil spirits around us, and I believe they can offer some protection. But against the yenaglooshi, I can't be sure. I turned to look at Diego and Lucia in the very back. Lucia was holding on to her father Diego, her face buried in his shoulder. Carlos, keeping his eyes on the road, turned and told us all. There's Alpine, not too far from here. We can find a small motel for the night, just a place for Diego and Lucia to rest while we figure out our next move. I chimed in. Sounds like a plan. And Bill? I'm not sure, man, but I hesitated, trying to find the right words. This issue that you have has nothing to do with us. Bill looked straight ahead, and then slowly turned to meet my gaze, his voice steady. This has everything to do with us. Every single one of us in this car. We cannot run from this forever, he warned. We might avoid it for a while, find some temporary safe place, but it will always be there, lurking, waiting in the dark. The only true way out of this is to seek a cleansing from a medicine man. Carlos then turned around. A what? A medicine man? What is that? Bill sighed, taking a moment to gather his thoughts. A medicine man is someone who can heal others. Not only that, but they're a spiritual guide. They have the knowledge and understanding of rituals and ceremonies. They have the power to cleanse people, places, and even objects of dark energies and spirits. If anyone can help us, it would be a medicine man. The eyes of Carlos opened up, and he nodded slowly. I get it now. So you mean like a, ¿cómo se dice? Like a brujo. So you're talking about a witch doctor. Bill gave a small nod. Yeah, somewhat. Though every culture has its distinctions and practices, but the essence is the same. Someone who understands the rituals and ceremonies. In this case, we need their knowledge and rituals to protect and cleanse ourselves from yenaglooshi. Diego, who had been silent the whole time, suddenly spoke up, his voice filled with fear. My mother back in Mexico, she's what you might call a bruja, or a witch doctor. She used to tell me and Lucia about other beings, and even others that we don't see around us. Everyone in the vehicle turned their attention to him. Bill's eyes sharpened. Your mother knows about these things? Diego nodded. Yeah, she's been practicing for as long as I can remember. People from our small pueblo would come to her for help with things they couldn't explain or understand. Bill cleared his throat, breaking the heavy silence that followed what Diego had said. There's a medicine man that I know of. I actually met him during one of those cultural festivals that I attended a few years ago. He's respected and well known in the tribe. Carlos shifted uneasy in his seat, glancing over at Diego and then to Bill. Bill responded, He's in a reservation, not far from here. It's actually right in Alpine. Bill unfolded a worn-out map out of his pocket, and he started to trace a road with his finger. In order to reach Alpine from here, we'll have to get on the main highway for a stretch. I know it's not ideal, especially given our activities. However, it will cut hours off of our journey. And just so you know, this isn't a guaranteed solution, but it's the best chance we have. The main highway? That's risky, Bill. We're already trying to lay low, and the highways will have patrol cars, I said. Bill's eyes then locked with mine. I understand the risk, but we have something more serious behind us. Time isn't on our side. These back roads are twisty, poorly lit, and they add time to the journey. The highway, on the other hand, is direct and fast. Carlos then said, and it's more open. If all of this is true, and it will follow us wherever we go, then it will have a harder time catching up on a wide open road, I think. Bill then continued, once we're past the main stretch of the highway, I know a series of back roads that will take us straight to the res, away from any dangers. Alright, Bill, let's hope the highway is quiet tonight. As I mentioned in my previous letter, we always placed our trust in Carlos when it came to driving. Yet, this time was different. All our previous travels, following well-known roads we'd taken before. But now we had found ourselves threading through the unfamiliar countryside. As the hum of the engine filled the air and the miles rolled past, thoughts consumed my mind. The events of the day, once seeming so normal, had taken a dark and unexpected turn that I could never have imagined. I looked at the road in front of us, endless possibilities and so many dangers. The adrenaline rush from earlier began to go away. It was replaced by a sense of dread. I had been involved in several high-risk operations before, running from law enforcement, dealing with unexpected complications, but nothing like this. This felt different, supernatural. The things we had seen, the stuff Bill was talking about, it was all stuff straight from a horror film, only this was no movie. This was real life. The heavy weight of fear pressed down on me. Were we actually being hunted by a creature of legend? Did the actions we had done, or even the actions of Bill's ancestors, really did have consequences? How did a normal weekend like this go wrong? I glanced at Carlos. His face was filled with worry. As he gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles were white. He too must have been questioning everything, wondering how he ended up in this situation. Behind us was Bill sitting with a pensive look, his knowledge of the creature and what he had discovered possibly weighing heavy on him. This line of work is filled with known dangers, but there's also a certain code that we all understand. Along the border, there are trails and concealed roads that are passed down through word of mouth back in Mexico. These networks of towns and hideouts have been established over the years, and even though different coyotes might be in the passage, the roads remain the same. This shared knowledge sometimes means that we cross roads with other people. Such was the case about a year ago. We were escorting a family of 4. The night was calm and quiet. We were guiding the family through a secluded trail when the narrow pathway suddenly expanded into a small clearing. Not surprised, we stumbled upon another group. The leader, or at least what I assumed was the coyote, a tall white guy, with scars crisscrossing down one cheek. It turned out that we had both decided to use this spot as a pickup for the people that we were crossing over. We had already told the family's contacts to meet us there, but the other group wasn't so friendly of sharing the space. Carlos attempted to diffuse the tension, saying that we would leave and return in a few hours, but I guess they didn't want to hear it. The situation spiraled, and before we knew it, guns were drawn, and threats were being shouted. Eventually, the tall white guy, quote-unquote, granted us to leave and told us to not come back, and we actually relocated about 30 minutes away. Relieved, we settled down for the remainder of the night. However, I was awoken by the sound of gunshots, jumping me awake to the sight of our camp being destroyed. Some of our backpacks had been trashed and looted. It dawned on me that the other group had trailed us to rob us, and to make matters worse, the gunshots had attracted a nearby border patrol unit. The distant sound of the vehicles were getting closer. They had robbed us, and then shot in the air, drawing the attention of Border Patrol towards us. We barely managed to escape and return to safety, but this whole thing engraved a hard lesson into me. Since then, I've been cautious of coming across other people. I have learned to keep distance and move carefully if we ever come across other people. Then, there was a Border Patrol incident near the Rio Grande. We were making our way under the cover of night, when suddenly, powerful floodlights washed over us. Someone had tipped off the Border Patrol, and they were on us faster than we could have thought. The sound of the police pierced the night. We were running for our lives. The adrenaline pumping through my veins that night was like nothing I had ever felt. The good thing though is that at this point, we were actually on our way back to Mexico after dropping a family off, with the sound of the river to one side, making ourselves harder targets if we did end up getting caught. It was close, but we managed to escape them, regrouping a few miles down into Mexico, where we always said we would meet up if something happened. While these past challenges were risky, they were regarding people, confrontations with fellow humans, a risk that came with the stuff we were doing. But what I saw back at the farmhouse, this yenaglooshi, was something else. The tires crunched against the gravel as the narrow back roads gave way to smooth asphalt. The inside of the car was filled with tension. I could feel it, each of us lost in our own thoughts, processing everything that was going on. As Carlos maneuvered the Suburban, the glaring headlights of one vehicle, driving on the opposite lane of us, served as a reminder that we were re-entering the real world. The highway was quiet, with only a few trucks and late-night drivers sharing the road. The Suburban's tires hummed on the road surface, the only noise in a world that seemed much too silent. As we continued, a signpost loomed out of the darkness on the right side of the road, reflecting the headlights in a way that made the white lettering gleam brightly against its green backdrop. Marfa, Texas, 16 miles, it said, pointing to the left. To the right, another arrow. Alpine, Texas, 13 miles. Good old Marfa, Texas, with its mysterious lights. And then there was Alpine, a connection to the Big Bend region, with its old historic downtown, and a lone university as well. Carlos adjusted his grip on the steering wheel. He briefly glanced at the sign, then set his eyes back on the road ahead. I turned to look at everybody in the back, and then I said, "So whenever we get to Alpine, this is what we're gonna do. We'll get a motel, get 2 rooms. I will contact Diego and Lucia's point of contact, and let them know where we are at. Bill, I know what you're gonna say, but to be honest, I don't know what this thing was, but I think we're pretty clear from it." To be honest, I knew what I had seen. I know what we had all seen, but it's been hours, and nothing's happened. "We should be heading to the medicine man first," Bill said, frustration evident in his voice. "Every minute we waste is taking us closer to more danger." Carlos shot a glance at him through the rearview mirror. "We need to ensure Diego and Lucia are safe. Taking care of them is our first priority. We can't drag them further into this mess without some sort of plan." "But you don't get it. None of you do," Bill said. "This isn't like running from the Border Patrol or evading other people. This is something else we're dealing with. Every extra mile we drive away from the medicine man, it's placing us more in danger. We need a middle ground. We get Diego and Lucia to Alpine. We ensure they're safe. Then, without delay, we head to the medicine man with Bill, and that's it," I said. Bill let out a frustrated breath, clearly unhappy, but he nodded. As Carlos continued driving, with his eyes straight ahead, it got silent for about 5 minutes. I turned to look at Carlos, and he kept his eyes straight ahead, but the silence was soon interrupted by my thoughts. I began, my voice slightly shaky. "Remember Miguel's warning back at the border about the families disappearing?" Carlos exhaled deeply. "Yeah, I remember. He told us to be more cautious in this area. Remember the other stories I had heard of people who went missing? And when they were found, their bodies were twisted in ways you couldn't imagine. his voice lowered, filled with dread. "Do you think this creature, this thing we encounter, could be behind it all?" Bill's head snapped up, and with a voice of concern, "What exactly did Miguel say?" he pressed. Carlos hesitated for a moment, gauging Bill's reaction. He spoke of stuff that had been happening to people, and not just disappearing, but when some of them were eventually found, they were unrecognizable. Their bodies were mangled. Bill's gaze dropped to his hands, clenched tightly in his lap. He appeared to be grappling with his thoughts, choosing his words carefully. "There are stories I have heard." "Fuck!" shouted Carlos. The familiar hum of the Suburban's engine began to sputter sounds, similar to the ones we had heard when we were driving to Bill's farm. Carlos gripped the wheel tightly as he quickly looked at the dashboard. "Chingada madre. Fuck," he said, wielding the engine to maintain its momentum. But the sputtering got worse, becoming more desperate. "Hijo de su puta madre," Carlos said, smacking the steering wheel in frustration. His face was a mix of panic and disbelief, eyes darting to the fuel gauge, which still showed half a tank. Then, the engine struggling sound let out one final, defeated cough before it gave out completely, sliding the vehicle into eerie silence except for the rolling of the tires against the asphalt. The Suburban's momentum carried it ahead for a few more seconds before it rolled to a stop. The headlights were starting to dim. Bill, Carlos, and I looked at each other, stranded in the middle of a highway, with Diego and Lucia, and with something following us. Was the last situation we thought we would be in. In the midst of this dread, the instincts of Carlos kicked in. With a sense of urgency and speed, he opened the central console, revealing 2 guns. Without a second thought, he handed one to me. Our eyes met, and in that tense moment, we knew what was next. "Morir matando es la ley," he said. "Going down dying while killing is the law." It sent a chill down my spine. It signified what we were ready to do in order to survive this situation. I know earlier I said how we were different from other coyotes, but just to prove to you, we never even showed our guns because we know it made people nervous. We wanted Diego and Lucia to feel the most comfortable they could be. Even though now, this seemed to be the worst situation I had ever been in myself. Carlos was the first to step out of the vehicle, his movements quick, following his lead. I flung my door open, taking a deep breath of the cold night air. Turning to everybody else, my voice was firm, leaving no room for debate. "Alright, listen closely," I said. "We're walking now. You will not speak. You will not make a sound. Just follow my lead and move fast." Assuming this role wasn't my preferred style, but the gravity of our situation demanded it. Our survival and being caught was dependent on many factors, and I wanted to make sure that nobody caused anything to put us at risk. "Bill, get out," I said. "Diego, help Lucia and stay close." As Bill climbed out of the car, Diego clutched his daughter's hand, pulling her gently along with him. Their eyes were filled with fear, reflecting the eerie glow of the dim headlights. "Alright, Bill and Diego." I glanced over at the dark outline of the trees in the distance. "Start heading for that tree line over there. Stay low and move as quietly and quickly as possible. We'll catch up to you all." They nodded, their silhouettes fading quickly as they ran towards the cover of the forest. Every second was counting now, and our window of opportunity was closing. Carlos put the Suburban in neutral, and then we positioned ourselves at the rear of the Suburban, setting our stance to push the heavy vehicle, muscle straining as I pushed. As the Suburban's tires started crunching on the roadside gravel, my attention was caught by a distant glimmer, a small light in the distance. Unmistakably, a vehicle approaching. It became clear with every passing second. Even though it was still quite a distance away, it was getting closer. "We need to hurry, there's a car coming," I urgently said to Carlos, with the weight of the Suburban starting to feel more heavy. "I see it," Carlos said while pushing. The sight of those distant lights, growing closer, motivated us to get the vehicle off the road as fast as possible. Finally, we were able to push the Suburban as it came to rest in a ditch, hidden from the main road. Carlos and I, gasping for air, looked at each other before breaking into a sprint, aiming to catch up with everyone else and disappear into the tree line before the coming vehicle reached the sub. The faint outline of Bill, Diego, and Lucia could barely be seen as they darted towards the tree line. Their forms were blending into the night. The distant hum of the incoming vehicle grew louder, adding urgency to our steps. "We can't let them see us," Carlos said. We both knew that if the approaching vehicle decided to stop and investigate the abandoned Suburban on the side of the road, we would most likely be in trouble. Every footstep felt heavy. The tree line, which initially seemed so distant, was slowly coming into clear focus. Suddenly, the noise of the vehicle's engine grew louder, indicating it was nearly close. Instead of making it to the tree line, I decided to fall and lay down as Carlos did the same thing, our bodies flat against the dirt, praying that we wouldn't be seen. With its headlights glaring bright in the dark, raced by without even slowing down. We remained still for a few more moments, just to be sure. The sound of its engine gradually faded, swallowed by the night. Only then did we decide to exhale and stand up. Sharing a glance of relief, I could make out the outlines of Bill, Diego, and Lucia, who had paused to wait for us. Just before we reached the spot where Bill, Diego, and Lucia were waiting, I turned to Carlos. "How many vehicles are you down now with this one gone?" Carlos, with a smirk, "That one makes it a total of 8 in the last 2 months. I raised an eyebrow. "Man, you go through them like candy." Carlos then shrugged. "It's all part of the game, my friend. These aren't your normal vehicles. They're not traceable." Seeing my puzzled expression, he continued, "I got a few connections with a deal with an uncle who works for the Sinaloa cartel as a driver. They guard the GM factories down in Guanajuato that they are using as a cover for other businesses. He sells me vehicles with no trace, no history, completely clean. Once their job is done, I get rid of them. However, with the recent changes that GM had done, for example, by choosing to discontinue the Chevy Avalanche, which was always built and shipped out of Mexico, made it a little bit more difficult to get vehicles." "Man, that's a dangerous game," I said, thinking of the high risk that was involved in dealing with the cartels. Carlos nodded, his smirk fading. "It's either play the game or get played." Carlos mentioning ditching vehicles triggered a familiar memory, prompting a half chuckle from me. "Remember that time when the vehicle started leaking, overheated smack in the middle of the road?" Carlos laughed, the sound echoing slightly in the silence of the night. "Oh man, that was a mess. I still blame that junk of a car you got me from that shady dealer in Nogales." I rolled my eyes, recalling the questionable choice. "It was a bargain, man. But yeah, most likely not the best choice." The memory was both bitter and sweet. "We ended up walking non-stop," Carlos said, "through that fucking hard terrain, all the way to Bill's fucking farm. It took us almost a day. Bill's place was always our fallback. Whenever things went south, we knew we could count on him. His farm was like a sanctuary, away from everybody. Plus, it was a pickup point for all the families that we would bring over. After the lesson we learned from the white guy that robbed us, we learned it was better to have a connection on this side of the border instead of relying on a motel, street corner, or even a store for pickup." As we finally reached the others, I placed a reassuring hand on the shoulder of Diego, noting the deep concern in his eyes. "Hey, we're safe for now," I whispered. Bill, with his years of experience in this area, knew the terrain well. He adjusted the bag on his shoulder and looked at all of us. "Alpine ain't too far from here," he said, pointing towards the faint silhouette of hills visible under the pale moonlight. "We just need to cut through the woods and stay out of sight." As we started walking into the woods, I looked back to see the Suburban. It was completely pitch black, and for a quick second, I swore I was going to see that coyote figure, standing somewhere in the open field looking at us. But there was nothing. As we walked into the woods, Lucia, clinging to her father Diego, kept looking around. Then, Diego's voice trembled. "Hey, What about entering Alpine at this hour? Isn't that risky? Bill nodded. Diego's right. Arriving in the middle of the night, especially under these circumstances, might draw unwanted attention. Diego, his voice filled with anxiety, surprisingly started speaking more, as if something had changed. I was shocked. What about that thing? Are we really gonna spend the night in the woods with that thing lurking behind us? Diego said. Lucia clung stronger to her father, her eyes filled with fear at the mention of this. Carlos glanced at the charm hanging around his neck, its gleam reflecting the faint moonlight. These necklaces, he said, gripping it tightly. They're supposed to keep us safe, right? Bill nodded and said, they're supposed to ward off evil, as long as we keep them on. We should be safe. But he hesitated for a moment. It's important that we don't remove them, not even for a second. Lucia then started looking at her own little necklace. But what if that creature doesn't follow us? Maybe it lost our trail, or maybe it wasn't even after us. Maybe it's just out there, I said. Carlos raised an eyebrow. It is weird though, if we did indeed encounter that thing. Why isn't it chasing us? And why did it let us get away? Bill, looking at us, responded. There are things that just operate in ways we don't understand. Sometimes they hunt, sometimes they observe, and sometimes they just want to put fear. Diego then said, so you're saying we might be safe here? Bill exhaled slowly. I'm saying we have to be cautious and rely on our wits. These necklaces will provide protection, but we should not get carried away. Carlos then chimed in. It's been a long day. Maybe it's better if we find a spot and rest for the night here in the woods. At least for the next few hours till the sun comes up. Yeah, that sounds good. We'll find a spot deep enough in the woods, maybe in a clearing. With the plan set, we began walking deeper into the woods. Every leaf and every snapping twig made our hearts race, reminding us that the unknown lurked in the unseen spaces around us. Eventually, after what felt like hours, we entered a small clearing. The trees were parted just enough to allow glimpses of the moonlight. Carlos scanning the area. This will do. We should rest here for a bit, he said, his voice echoing slightly in the stillness of the night. Alpine is basically 30 more minutes that way. Let's rest and go into town once the sun rises, Bill said. We sat down and took a moment to catch our air. I approached Diego and Lucia, who seemed extremely tired, sitting beside them. I offered a reassuring smile. Ya mero llegamos. We're almost there, I whispered. Once we get to Alpine, we'll find a motel for you both. A safe place where you can rest, and then you can call your pickup to let them know your location. Everything will be okay. Maybe if I have time, I'll explain why when we cross someone over, nobody is allowed to carry a cell phone. Nobody, not even ourselves. Phone numbers were to be remembered. But let's just say that we didn't want no crazy emotional decisions being made by anybody. Not the family, not the people, and not even ourselves. We were to be disconnected from technology for a few days until we could make it. In case you didn't know, cell phones are traceable. And if you have time, I want you to look up what a geofence location warrant is. It's basically a warrant or a system that law enforcement reaches out to Google or any phone carrier, and they can request a list of cell phones that have been connected to a cell phone tower from that radius, and this is how they can track you down. It'll tell you the time, the location, the phone number, and the cell phone itself. Lucia then looked up at me, her big eyes filled with fear. Diego, placing an arm around his daughter, gave me a nod of gratitude. Confiamos en ti. Gracias. We trust you. Thanks, he murmured. The clearing had now become a resting stop for all of us. In the midst of all this, for a brief moment, it offered a much-needed rest. The clearing was quiet, except for the distant calls of crickets chirping and the rustling of leaves above us. The moonlight would at times provide glimpses of the trees all around us. I walked over to Carlos and I sat next to him and said, "Hey man, so I have a different idea. So instead of all of us walking into town together, don't you think it might seem off to somebody? I think it's better if I go alone. I get a room and then come back and we all walk into town at different times." Carlos looked at me. "It's a good plan," he whispered, "but it's risky. Are you sure you want to do this on your own?" I nodded. "Think about it, man. It's far less suspicious for one person to wander into town than all of us showing up together, especially at this time, or even in the morning." I guess I wasn't whispering because out of nowhere, Bill chimed in. "You're right. Alpine isn't too friendly to strangers, especially with a border patrol station in town as well." Carlos reached into his pocket, handed me some cash. "Here, this should cover the room and anything else you might need." I went up to Diego and Lucia and explained to them the new plan. Lucia just kept staring at me with her eyes wide open. Diego looked at me worried, and I said, "Hey, no te preocupes. Don't worry. I'll be back in a few." I know there was a huge fear building up inside of him. How many stories had he heard of coyotes abandoning families and even couples, leaving them for dead? Diego didn't know me on a personal level, but I know we connected through word of mouth. As I said earlier, I was known for my safe reputation. "Stay close to Carlos. He will take care of you both," I told him. As I started walking back towards the woods and continued my walk, each rustle of leaves or snapping twigs sent my heart racing. I could see the town coming into view as I got closer to the tree line. Gun in hand, I tried to regulate my breathing as well, telling myself that the mysterious creature wouldn't leave the property of Bill. It hadn't followed us so far. Bill seemed to know about what was going on. He always spoke of how the land had traces to his ancestors. Spirits and the unseen were topics that he always enjoyed discussing every time we met at his farmhouse or at the festivals. Maybe the creature was bound to the land, or maybe there was something else, keeping it at bay. You see, being in this business, you knew all the towns close to the border. However, getting there from the middle of nowhere was a whole different task. It seems like Bill was right. He was real familiar with these areas. Pushing aside the hanging branches, I began to notice the first signs of civilization. The distant sound of a car engine, the faint glow of lights, was close. I just had to hold my nerve a little longer. The woods started to get thin, and soon I found myself on the outskirts of Alpine. The streets were mostly alone, with just a couple of stray cats darting between parked vehicles. I kept my head down, making sure that I drew as little attention to myself as possible. With the border patrol station nearby, I couldn't afford any slip-ups. I couldn't afford a single mistake. After another 10 minutes of brisk walking, I spotted it. The motel. Its neon sign flickered, just as I remembered. Taking a deep breath of air, I approached the front door, ready to secure a room for all of us. As I walked into the motel lobby, a bell above the door chimed softly, announcing my entrance. The inside was dimly lit, with worn-out laminated flooring. Behind the counter, an older woman with graying hair and a pair of reading glasses that were dangling from a chain around her neck. She looked up from a crossword puzzle. "Morning, what can I do for you?" she greeted. "I'm looking for a room for the night. Just something simple." She looked at me curious, as if trying to gauge my story. "Are you traveling alone?" "Yeah, I'm just passing through town," I said, attempting to keep the conversation brief. She nodded, scribbling something down on a notepad. "Alright, that'll be $45 for the night." I gave her the cash, noting the keys hanging on the wall behind her, each labeled with a room number. "You'll be in room 8, she said, handing me a key with a faded plastic tag. "It's just around the corner. Breakfast starts at 7 a.m. if you're interested. Coffee's always fresh." "Thank you," I replied. "Fresh coffee? Yeah, right. By the way, do the rooms have phone lines?" Only phone available is the one right here in the lobby, sweetie. She offered a half smile. You take care now. Alpine's a quiet town, but it's always good to be careful. This voice of caution or warning in her voice caught me off guard. Taking the key, I made my way to room 8, feeling the weight of the night's events pressing down on me. I opened the door and looked around. Perfect. This room is perfect for Diego and Lucia until they get picked up. I closed the door, and I walked back towards the lobby as I overheard the TV news playing in the background. However, what caught my attention was what the news anchor was saying. I stepped closer to the counter again. More bodies being found along the border. Authorities have still not determined what could be the cause. Hey, I began, pointing towards the TV. I've been hearing a lot about those disappearances lately. Has that been going on for a while? She looked up at me with a serious expression. It's been happening more frequently these past few months. People have gone missing, then they find them in real bad shape, near the border, or sometimes they're not found at all. It's actually got a lot of people scared. Do you know what's going on? I asked, curious and trying to gauge if there was any connection to what we have experienced. She leaned in closer to the counter, her voice dropping to a whisper. Some people think it's related to the cartels, but there are talks in town about something else. I felt a shiver run down my spine. My mind instantly jumped to the creature from Bill's farm. Could this creature be responsible for these things? The lady continued. I lived in Alpine all my life, and I heard stories about strange things happening in these parts, but nothing like this. This is different. I nodded. Thanks for the heads up. I'll be sure to be careful. She gave me a worried look. Just stay safe, alright? I will. And by the way, can I trouble you for a cup of water? She sighed. She rose from her seat and retrieved the glass from beneath the counter, proceeding to the water dispenser that was behind her. As she filled the glass, I extended my hand to take it, quenching my thirst. And that's when she noticed my necklace. I looked down and grabbed the necklace. It's a necklace for good luck, I began. It was given to me by a longtime friend. It's also believed to ward off evil and harm. She leaned in, squinting at the detailed design on the necklace. For a moment, there was an awkward silence as her gaze seemed to pierce through the necklace and into my soul. She started to clear her throat. It's strange. Over the past few months, that exact design has been popping up around here. What do you mean? I asked with a confused look. She hesitated for a moment. Those disappearances you were talking about, she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Every single body that they have found in the last couple of months. They said they have found them with a necklace of that sort. It looks similar to that design. Her words made me freeze. The water glass slipped from my hand, shattering on impact and splashing the rest of the water on the floor. The noise echoed in the silence that followed. She rushed to hand me a paper towel. Here, sweetie, put these towels on top of that and just pick up the glass and throw it in that trash bin over there. The lady then looked at me. I'm just wondering where you got it from. Just be careful to be seen with it. That necklace, it actually might be the opposite that you think it is. Our annual camping trip was always a perfect time to get away from the daily busyness of life. A way to reconnect with nature and each other. It's something we had been doing since we had gotten out of high school. Every summer, my friends and I would choose a different, often remote location to explore and go camping. And so this summer, the 6 of us, Sarah, Mike, Jennifer, Luke, Emily, and I, decided to go further up north in Utah, into the Wasatch Cache National Forest. When the day finally arrived, we met at dawn. We had decided to take my beat-up old van that my father had given me as a graduation gift after high school, around 6 years or so. It was a family possession that was being passed down, so you can imagine what it looked like. I do gotta say, even though I was embarrassed about it at first, it is still running and getting me from point A to point B without any issues. It was spacious and had enough seats for all of us to ride together, even with all of our gear, which included all of our tents and camping stuff. The drive to the national forest was beautiful, and it also had amazing views. The road stretched before us as hours passed, and the landscape shifted from small roads to being surrounded by dense trees. We shared stories, and the occasional debate about the best path to take to reach our destination. Sarah, who was sitting in the front passenger seat, looked at the map that she had spread out, her finger tracing the various roads they could take. Alright folks, we got a couple of options here. The main road will take us through the heart of the forest, but this secondary road might offer a more scenic journey. Before venturing into the wooded pines of Utah, we stopped by one of the local forest offices to gather information. Google and iPhones couldn't always be relied upon in these remote areas, so Sarah had purchased a detailed local paper map. She was always the one planning every trip down in detail. I know we're used to having technology guide us, but out here, it's best to rely on good old-fashioned paper, she said, holding up the map with a grin. Mike, who was sitting behind me, leaned ahead, squinting at the map. Scenic is good, but how well maintained is that secondary road? The last thing we want is to get stuck out here in the middle of nowhere. Well, the map does say it's a bit longer, but it looks like it leads through some interesting landmarks. There's an old bridge marked here, and it seems like a more direct path to the campsite, Sarah said. Luke, who was sitting in the far back, raised an eyebrow with a grin. An old bridge, huh? Are we talking wooden planks, or Indiana Jones style adventure? Jennifer laughed. Let's hope it's somewhere in between. I'm all for adventure, but I'd rather not end up in a river. Leo, as the driver, what do you think? Sarah asked me. Well, seeing that we still have sunlight on our side, I say we take the scenic road. I mean, what's the rush, right? I vote for the old bridge. I'm gonna say the old bridge as well. Why don't we take a vote? Emily said. Everyone raised their hand except Mike. Sorry, Mike. Maybe next time you'll win, Sarah said. A decision had been reached. The secondary road, with its promise of scenic beauty. I veered onto the road, the wilderness and trees closing in. The path was narrow, flanked by dense woods that only gave way to small rays of the sunlight. After hours had passed and the sun began to set, we found ourselves coming across the bridge that spanned the river, the water reflecting the fading light, a contrast to the woods that lay ahead. It looks like this is the old bridge Sarah mentioned, Mike remarked, as I slowed down the van. Sarah peered out of the window, her eyes scanning the bridge. It definitely has that rustic charm, but I hope it's sturdy enough to support the van. Luke's grin returned as he leaned, his excitement evident. Well, there's only one way to find out. Jennifer laughed. Alright, but if we end up in the river, Luke, you're swimming back to the campsite. I'm not gonna lie, I was nervous. The bridge looked like it was a mixture of concrete and wood. What if we didn't make it? When was the last time this bridge was used? I eased the van slowly onto the creaky bridge, not even knowing what the point of driving slowly was, because if it was to break, it was gonna break. The worn planks made noises beneath the weight of the van, as the river flowed gently below. I looked in the rearview mirror to see everyone's scared faces as we crossed, still maintaining my eyes on the road back and forth. I saw Emily's eyes as she gazed out the water below. This is something like an adventure out of a movie, isn't it? I'm expecting to see hidden treasure on the banks, she said. Mike chuckled, his grip steady on one of the handlebars. Yeah, you're right. We're gonna find out what adventure this is if we end up falling, because you all decided to come through this raggedy bridge. Mike was always the more serious one, but courageous in the group. He always took challenges head on, and nothing ever seemed to scare him. Luke was the joker of the group. His sense of humor was always there, even in the most serious moments. Sarah, on the other hand, was our friend who was the most caring of the group. As I said, she always assumed the role of our mom, always making sure everything is planned to the detail. Emily was just silly all around. She was a close friend of all of us, that we simply enjoyed her company. She was the most serious female of the group, but didn't have the seriousness of Mike. Well, if that even makes sense. We ended up making it across the bridge, which I do want to point out, it's not even a long bridge. It simply looked like a small construction bridge that someone built to be able to get across. As the sun started going down, we continued driving with the trees closing in around us even more, almost creating what looked like a tunnel, with the headlights of the van being the only source now piercing the darkness. After what felt like an eternity, we finally reached our destination, a dirt open field that looked like where vehicles had parked in the past. Tall pine trees stood around the field, forming a natural dome that seemed to welcome us from the outside world. "Alright everyone, this is it," I said as I parked the van and stepped out, the air carrying a smell that hinted at the adventures that awaited us. There was a small stream nearby, its gentle flowing of water adding to the nature that surrounded us. We unloaded everything and we walked a little bit deeper into the woods until we stumbled upon a clearing not too far from where we had parked. We began the process of setting up camp, pitching tents, arranging firewood, and establishing a central gathering point where the campfire would soon be set ablaze. As the sun finished dipping below the horizon, casting the area in complete darkness, the tent stood up and the campfire pit awaited. We were all fascinated by the beauty of this place, away from the busyness and the stresses of every day in our life. So the first night there started fine, but as the campfire flames flicker in the breeze, we huddle around the fire, sharing stories and laughing, with a sense of security over us, just because of the presence of each other. With the trees casting long shadows over our campsite, and the branches creaking softly in the night wind, our voices would rise and fall as we took turns recounting past stories and adventures. We talked the normal things when you hang out with friends and family, the same old stories from the past. "Hey, remember that time Luke tripped over his own shoelaces and didn't have anything else to wear?" Emily giggled, making fun of Luke. He chuckled and rubbed the back of his neck. "Yeah, I remember. And I'm still gonna say that the tree root came out of nowhere." Jennifer leaned in. "Or what about that haunted house we dared each other to explore? I'm pretty sure we all had nightmares for weeks after that." Sarah with a smirk. "Alright, but what about this, y'all? The time we heard those strange noises outside our tents during that camping trip in the mountains." Mike's face turned serious and said, "Man, I thought we were being surrounded by wild animals or something." "That's right, and then we found out it was just a bunch of raccoons having a party in the woods," I said. Of course, throughout this whole time, Emily couldn't say anything but laugh. The night continued on, and it was always a great time to gather with my friends, especially after not seeing them for so long. As we were telling and recounting past adventures, something caught my attention. I was looking over to Mike as he was talking, and for a quick glimpse, at the edge of the woods, where the firelight struggled to penetrate the darkness, there was movement, a flicker of shadow that seemed to move between the trees. I quickly stood up and focused with my head to look over towards the tree line as I exchanged glances with the others. "Did any of you see that?" I whispered. Luke turned to look where I was looking and squinted into the darkness. "What did you see? Maybe a deer or something?" "It moved kind of strange for a deer," I said. Jennifer leaned closer to the fire. "I hope you're not trying to pull a prank, Leo." As I looked deeper into the tree line, still trying to get my eyes adjusted from staring at the fire for too long, I saw that the movement in the trees and branches was getting closer. It was something, or someone. I kept staring out into the tree line. This movement was drawing closer, slowly becoming visible by the light the fire was giving out. And that's when I noticed a silhouette of a hunched figure, And I guess that's when Luke finally saw it, because he said, "It looks like a person." "Do you think it's someone lost in the woods?" Emily whispered. "I hope it's not someone who's hurt," Sarah said, with concern in her voice. Luke chuckled. "Well, if this person is hurt, they're sure moving better than I would be. Who even goes wandering around the woods at this hour?" Emily said. At this point, all of us were standing, and that's when I decided to say, "Who's out there?" I yelled. Then, just as this silhouette became clear in the tree line, that's when a voice broke the silence.
"Greetings, young ones,"
This person said in a voice that held both wisdom and innocence. Emerging from the trees, I saw it was an older man.
"Forgive my intrusion. I spied the glow of your campfire from afar, and was drawn hoping it wasn't a wildfire that I would have to put out. This land, you see, holds a history long forgotten by many."
His steps and his form, revealing his age not only in his slightly stooped posture, but also in the deep lines engraved on his face. It was as though he was an extension of the trees surrounding us. As he drew closer, the crackling of the fire and the distant sounds of the forest underscored the quiet intensity of the moment. Finally, he approached the campfire, revealing his full features as he introduced himself.
"Pardon me, my name is Tog."
His voice, very old and raspy, with one of his eyes semi-shut, scars and years of life showing on his face. I offer a friendly smile. "Hey, I'm Leo, and this is Luke, Sarah, Emily, Jennifer, and Mike. We didn't expect to have company out here. What brings you to these woods at this hour?" He stared at us with his one eye.
"The woods have always been my refuge, my sanctuary, my safe place. I come here to remember the old ways, to honor the native land that sustained my ancestors."
"Native land?" Jennifer questioned, her voice in a serious manner. The old man nodded, his gaze fixed on the flickering flames. Staring at them, he said,
"Yes, this land was once home to my ancestors, and I have wandered these woods to honor their memory. But in all my years, it's very rare when I encounter fellow souls under these stars."
Mike leaned in, with curiosity but in a serious tone. "So, what brought you here tonight?" With a faint smile, Tog said,
"Your fire, as I said before. But then I heard the laughing that echoed through the trees. It reminded me of times in the past where I shared, and bonds were forged around similar fires."
"Are you telling us that you're camping out here too?" Emily asked. Tog's chuckle was like the rustling leaves themselves.
"Well, not quite. My old bones prefer the comforts of a proper bed, but I do find peace in these woods, even under the cover of night."
As the conversation flowed, Tog's words painted a picture of his relationship with the woods. The way he spoke, the stuff he was saying, seemed like he was one with the forest.
"There is nothing like finding peace and comfort within your own self, in the beauty of nature. There are hidden trails that go through the forest, roads known only to those who have taken the time to listen to the whispers of the woods. Every rustle of leaves, every flowing stream, and every whisper of the wind carries echoes of the past."
His voice full of reverence of the woods.
"Listen, the ancient wisdom of this land has much to teach, if one is willing to listen."
I'm not sure what it was, but the way he spoke and the way he looked seemed like he was just a hippie who loved the outdoors. Pretty harmless in my opinion. I took a step towards him and put my hand on his shoulder. Tog? Well, how do you spell your name?" I asked. "My name?"
"Well, that's the first time that somebody has ever asked me how to spell it. As I mentioned, I have a native background, so it's spelled T-A-O-G.
I figured that's how you spell it. Just wanted to make sure. Well, Toad, we're sharing stories ourselves, and it seems you have quite a few to tell. Would you care to join our campfire? His eye glinted with appreciation.
I would be honored to, young man.
As he settled into a log near the fire, and we all sat down, his presence seemed to infuse the night with a deeper sense of connection. He started telling stories of the hidden trails, the forgotten stories, and the ancient wisdom that whispered through the leaves, blending with the crackling of the fire and the rustling of the trees. He spoke not just of the past, but of the living spirit of the woods, a spirit that resonated with each of us as we gathered around the fire. As he delved into his stories and what seemed to be a TED talk on how we need to respect the woods and nature, he told us how he comes into the forest to spend seasons, to honor his spiritual ancestors, how he owns a few remote cabins, and has learned to be self-sufficient just like his ancestors. However, one specific story caught the attention of all of us. He told the story of a supposed creature that haunted these very woods for generations. Then, his voice took on a somber tone, and even the crackling fire seemed to be quiet, as if the forest itself was holding its breath to listen.
The whispering goat,
he began, his words dripping with a mixture of reverence and dread,
is a creature of darkness, a shapeshifter that walks a fine line between man and beast. It has a twisted power, the ability to mimic the voices of those it encounters, drawing them into its trap.
As he detailed this supposed creature, our circle grew tense. I could see the eyes of everyone else that they were paying attention to this specific story. He then lowered his gaze, and his voice, almost a whisper, he said,
"A few decades ago, my brother ventured into these woods, drawn by the whispers of familiar voices. As I was searching for him, I heard my own voice calling out to him, but it wasn't me. It was someone else calling out to him. That's when I think my brother believed he was responding to my call, but it was the whispering goat's deceit, and so he never returned, and I never found him. His fate, shrouded in mystery. I have carried the weight of that loss ever since, haunted by the knowledge that he may have fallen prey to the whispering goat."
A shiver crept down my spine as we all listened. When he concluded his tale, there was silence. Even the fire seemed to have absorbed the weight of his story as it started to go down. With a slow and crippled movement struggling to get up, he rose from his seat, his eye meeting each of ours in turn.
"I thank you all for allowing an old man to share his stories with you. But the night grows old, and it's time for me to return to the embrace of these ancient trees,"
he said in a voice that contained gratitude and sorrow. As he stepped away from the fire, he turned around and said,
"I almost forgot. Stay close,"
he said in a warning voice,
"and do not be swayed by the voices that you think you know."
The darkness seemed to cover him as he walked away, making him one with the shadows of the woods. It's almost like he was part of this landscape. We watched in silence as he receded into the darkness, each of us lost in our own thoughts. Even the noises of the forest seemed to hold its breath, a quiet reverence for the figure that had imparted both wisdom and a warning. And as the echoes of his footsteps crunching the leaves faded, the woods returned to their symphony of rustling leaves and distant whispers. A heavy silence fell within our group. Well, what the fuck was all that about? This hippie love-making tree hugger most likely has his tent somewhere out there and lives out here in the woods, Luke said. We tried shaking off the feeling, but I could tell that anxiety had filled everyone, thanks to the power of a supposed well-told ghost story. But as the night deepened, the campfire had dwindled to embers, and a thick blanket of darkness fell over the campsite. I do want to point out that whenever we went camping, we always either slept inside a tent or outside altogether by the campfire. I guess nothing like actually experiencing the beauty of nature. Tonight, we decided to all sleep in our sleeping bags around the dying campfire, as the events of the evening and the stories still linger in our heads. We all decided to go to sleep, and as I was falling asleep, in the dead of the night, that's when I heard it, a whisper that seemed to move through the air. It was a voice, soft and insistent, calling my name, Leo. I fully woke up. I sat up in my sleeping bag, with my senses on high alert, my eyes widened, scanning the darkness and everyone else laying down, the faint glimmer of dying embers offering little comfort. Did anybody hear that? I whispered, hoping to see if anyone around me was awake and heard. Mike, who was sleeping next to me, sat up and said in a groggy voice, hear what? Someone whispered my name. It sounded like you, Mike. Mike's expression shifted from grogginess to a growing sense of unease. That's not possible, Mike said, his eyes flickering to the dark woods that surrounded them. I was asleep? Jennifer then arose with a voice of mixture. Are you sure you didn't dream it, Leo? I know that we're all on edge after the story told by Toad. I haven't even gone to sleep. Every noise out here is making me stay awake. I know what I heard. It was right here in the camp, I said. Man, go to sleep, bro. You're hearing things now. Stop being such a wuss. There's nothing out here, Mike said. But then, just on the edge after Mike's last word, the faintest whisper, Leo. Everyone fell silent. The voice was real, undeniable, and it sounded like it was next to our campfire. We all looked to Mike. What? I didn't say anything, Mike said. Of course, it was complete darkness, so we couldn't even really see each other out there. So we all just huddled even closer with everyone else waking up groggy as well, and getting closer together too, seeking refuge in our shared presence. Okay, what's going on, y'all? I said. It's most likely that old Pawpaw trying to prank us. He's most likely out there with more people scaring campers, Mike said. Well, one of us should stand watch and just be on the lookout. It's already 4 a.m. and the sun will begin to rise in a few hours, I said. Of course, none of us ended up going back to sleep, and we all just stood awake with eyes wide open. The morning couldn't come soon enough. Seeing the daylight brought relief, but as we remember the night, others, including Luke, Sarah, and Emily, admitted hearing whispers as well, each in the voice of a different member of our group. We tried brushing it off as imagination, simply fueled by the stories that Toad was telling us last night. We got ready for the day, and the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting shadows on the forest floor. Emily suggested that we take a hike along one of the nearby trails that's on the map. Maybe some fresh air and a change of scenery will help us relax, she said, her voice trying to sound hopeful. Mike and Luke exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of curiosity. I guess it wouldn't hurt to explore a bit. I'm sure it was that old man whispering our names out from the trees last night. If I find him, once we go out there, he's really gonna be looking like an old dead beat up tree. Thanks to stupid Leo for telling him our names, Mike said. Sorry guys, I seriously thought he was just an old hermit walking through, I chuckled. There have been times in the past when we became friends with other campers in our annual trips, and we all shared names, even phone numbers, to communicate in the future, so I actually didn't think too much of it. We set off on the trail, our footsteps breaking the silence of the woods, the sunlight filtering through the leaves in patches of gold. As we walked, our conversation gradually shifted from the events of the previous night to lighter topics, remembering old camping trips, sharing funny stories, and debating the best way to make s'mores. It was almost like the woods were allowing us a moment of peace, a chance to reconnect and find comfort in each other's company. Hours passed, and we eventually found ourselves in a small clearing by a small stream. The sun was beginning its descent. We took a break, sitting by the water's edge, dipping our fingers in the cool stream. "Check this out, y'all," Luke said, his voice with a mixture of excitement. He pointed to the tree where patterns had been carved into the bark. Sarah stepped closer, her fingers tracing the carvings with a sense of wonder. "It's like a message left behind," she said as her eyes traced the lines. As we looked around more, we discovered other things. Small artifacts hanging from branches, crafted from natural materials, by sticks and stones, and even with symbols painted onto the stones. "Hey, it's like the woods are trying to tell us something similar to what Togue said," Emily slightly giggled. Mike raised an eyebrow. "Or maybe it's just people messing around in the woods. You know, leaving their mark." Luke nodded in agreement. "And branches crafted into what looks like symbols. They could be signs that they communicated like this back in the day." I guess the stories that Togue was sharing with us last night really did prove that we were in the midst of Native American land, and all these symbols and sticks and stones we found only reinforced that belief. Who knows? We might be standing on ground that's witnessed generations. Maybe these woods have secrets that date back centuries, Jennifer said. "Look guys, I get that this all seems interesting and everything, but let's not forget that we've been on these trips every year, and every time there's some sort of spooky tale or mysterious superstition that pops up. Remember the haunted lake we stumbled upon 2 years ago?" Mike said. Emily chuckled, her eyes with amusement. "The one with the vengeful water spirit that would drag people under if they swam too far out?" Mike with a grin. "Exactly. And what did we find? A perfectly serene lake where we spent a whole day swimming and goofing off." Luke chimed in. "And don't forget the enchanted forest last year, where we were told that we would get lost if we ventured too far into the deep woods." Jennifer, with a laughing tone, said, "Right, we found a trail with signs pointing us to various landmarks." Sarah joined in. "And let's not even talk about the cursed campground, where they said that we would have to ward off evil spirits to make it through the night." As everybody was laughing, Mike nodded, his point emphasized. "See y'all, it's always been a bit of fun and games, fueled by local legends. I'm not saying I don't appreciate the spooky environments, especially by the campfire, but come on y'all, this is just the same old stuff we have encountered before." Emily grinned in a sarcastic and playful tone. "So you're telling us you don't believe in any of this? Not even a tiny bit?" Mike shrugged. "I'm not saying I'm a complete non-believer, but I do think a lot of people exaggerate. Like, what are the odds that we stumble upon some mystical artifacts on this trip, right? Or a whispering goat?" Luke raised his eyebrows and said, "Maybe the woods are trying to prove you wrong, Mike." The back and forth continued with everybody, as Mike reminded us that we were all friends who had been through it all before. As the day transitioned into evening, we made our way back to the campsite. The sinking sun painted the sky orange and pink. We couldn't ignore the fact that another night was approaching, a night that, given recent events, filled us with a mix of anticipation and dread. Back at the campsite, we set up and got dinner ready. The campfire crackled to life, with its flames dancing, and the forest too seemed to come alive with the chorus of all the critters starting to make noises. As darkness settled over the campsite, we gathered around the campfire once again. The events of the previous nights were still fresh in our minds. As the evening went on, a thick fog started to surround the entire campsite, and as our campfire struggled, its light barely puncturing the fog, Mike always the brave one, volunteered to gather more firewood. He ventured out into the mist, his flashlight beam gradually merging with the surroundings. This is when everything went to hell. As the fog started getting more thick, and it was getting even more darker, we realized that Mike had been gone for a while. The minutes felt like hours. We exchanged glances. He's been gone for quite a while, y'all. Shouldn't he have been back by now? Emily said with a concerned voice. Maybe he got lost in the fog. One of us should have gone with him, Luke said. Jennifer's eyes were wide. What if he's hurt? What if he encounters something out there? After about 30 minutes, the environment grew heavy. The campfire's embers started to sputter. The fog had taken on an almost suffocating presence. Maybe we should go find him. We can't just wait here in the dark, Sarah said. And that's when I decided to get up. And I said, I'll go look for him. I mean, how far can he be, right? I took about 2 steps the way Mike had left. And that's when I saw a figure emerging through the fog. It was Mike, and he was coming back with firewood, except the way he was walking was very dull as he approached the campfire. His movements were mechanical, almost as if he was in a trance. Sarah, always the one to confront difficult situations, broke the silence. Did you get lost or something? He turned to look at her. I'm fine. I found firewood. The unease in the air deepened, each of us sensing that something was wrong. Mike's presence felt off. It was as if a shadow had draped itself over his being, distorting his familiar features. His whole demeanor was replaced by an emotionless state. I couldn't help but notice something strange about Mike. He was sitting slightly apart from the group, staring directly at the flames, not even saying anything. I was thinking he was just tired or scared, so I tried to engage him in conversation. Hey Mike, remember that one time we got lost and had to spend an extra night out? But he didn't respond. Well, he did, but his response was delayed. And when he did answer, his tone was off. It lacked the seriousness I was used to. It was almost like he was hearing us talk, but responding to questions a moment too late. You mean when we thought the squirrels were plotting against us? Luke chimed in, trying to break the growing tension. Yeah, that's right. And you were convinced that the woods had eyes and ears. Mike's laugh, if you could even call it that, sounded forced. A hollow echo, you can say. Yeah, good times, he replied, his gaze distant. Emily leaned ahead with a concerned voice. Hey, Mike, are you okay? You're acting different. Mike then looked at her. I'm not sure. Something about this place. It's like it's under my skin. Jennifer's voice held a note of unease. Weird things have been happening tonight. The voices, the fog. I think we should consider leaving. Mike's gaze remained fixed on the flames. His voice almost lowered to a whisper. Maybe that's not a bad idea. The gravity of his words hung heavy in the air. We exchanged uneasy glances. The weight of the strange things happening, now impossible to ignore. I looked around at my friends, each face reflecting a mix of fear. It was a painful realization that the place that had once been our escape was now a source of unease. Well, we should leave. Something isn't right here, I said. Nods of agreement followed, the decision being unanimous this time. The prospect of abandoning our camping trip was sad, but the safety of our group came first, and so we started packing everything. It took about 30 minutes to break everything down, and by then, it was now completely dark. However, as we finished packing our gear and glanced around to make sure everything was ready, a sinking feeling settled in our stomachs. Mike, who had been acting distant and detached, was just standing by the edge of the clearing, staring into the depths of the woods. Unlike the rest of us, he hadn't lifted a finger to help with the packing, and his usual seriousness and energetic self replaced by an almost trance-like state. "Hey Mike, are you alright, man?" I said with a concerned tone. Mike's response was slow and distant, as though his mind was somewhere far away. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just thinking." Jennifer, exchanging a worried look with all of us. It was clear that something had changed in Mike. As we started getting ready to walk from the campfire back to the van, that's when we heard it. Somewhere in the distance, we heard another voice. It sounded like Mike's voice, and it was calling out, sounding confused and pleading for help. And that's when Emily said, "So if that's Mike calling out to us, then who is?" As we turned around, Mike was still staring into the woods, but that's when his body started contorting, almost glitching like. Chaos erupted. Jennifer, always quick thinking, threw a log towards this Mike that was standing on the edge of the campsite and yelled everyone to run back to the van. Guided by adrenaline and our flashlights, we dashed through the woods. As we all ran with our belongings, I dared to not look back. But still, a horrible screech drew my attention back to see what had caused this. And that's when I stopped in my tracks to see that whatever this thing was now had its limbs stretched and twisted, reshaping into something that defied the laws of nature. But it was the face that sent a shockwave of terror through me. The human features contorted and elongated, the skin stretching and warping as if it was struggling to contain the monstrosity beneath. The eyes, once familiar and warm, became stretched out and unnaturally slanted, their color shifting to an abyss-like blackness that seemed to absorb all light. The nose receded and resembled the snout of a goat. The mouth was a grotesque smile, its lips curling back to reveal rows of jagged, pointed teeth. Every detail was a horrifying mixture of human and animal. That's when I felt my body come back to life, and I yelled to keep running and to not look back, not knowing that even if they got to the van, how would they even get inside because I had the key? I kept running and running, thinking what would happen if this thing caught up to us. And then, there, in the distance, I saw the clearing of the trees and familiar sight of the van, and heard my friends screaming to hurry up. As I neared the van, I saw that the real Mike, with his clothes torn, was there with the rest of the group. With no time to lose, we crammed into the van and sped off. As I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw this creature standing where we had parked at. After about 5 minutes of driving, Luke finally spoke and said, "What the fuck was that?" That's when Mike finally spoke and said, "When I ventured into the woods, the fog seemed to grow denser with each step I was taking. Soon, my flashlight was the only thing piercing the gloom. I had collected some firewood when I heard whispers. I heard y'all's voices calling out to me. I tried tracing them but got lost. Then, I saw me, or a copy of me. It looked like my reflection in a murky pond." Mike then stopped talking, struggling to find the words. This other me was trying to draw me closer, with words and voices that belonged to you all. That's when I decided to hide behind a tree, using the shadows as cover, and every time I tried to make a move towards the camp, it seemed to sense me, always blocking my path. I thought I was done for, but then I remember a stream we crossed earlier. That's when I made a dash for it and jumped in. The flow carried me downstream, away from that thing. I crawled out, exhausted, and walked towards the van. That's when I started yelling for you all, and that's when you all came running from the forest. As we were speeding away, all the trees were whipping past us, their branches scratching the sides of my van, almost like desperate fingers trying to pull us back. over the noise of the engine and the pounding of my heart. That's when we heard a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere, all at once. As I kept my eyes on the road, the headlights briefly illuminated a monstrous form darting between the trees. The creature was a horrible version of a goat, but massive in scale, murky gray, almost appearing slick in the dim light, with ragged scars and patches of bare skin. Its eyes, though, were the most terrifying. Deep, soulless pits of black. "What the hell is that?" screamed Emily, clutching her seat. I pressed the gas pedal to the floor, with the van's engine roaring. The creature, with an incredible speed, moved through the dense forest, its every leap and bound bringing it closer to us. As we went through a sharp bend, this thing lunged, its massive jaws snapping inches from the rear window. Luke, who was in the back seat, rummaged through our camping supplies and hurled a flare out the window. It lit up the surrounding area in a bright crimson glow, distracting the creature for a few seconds. I continued speeding, tires screeching, and for a moment, it seemed we had lost it. But then, a screeching noise that echoed through the woods. The creature resumed its relentless pursuit, its form now even more twisted and grotesque under the flickering light of the flare. The road ahead clear, revealing the bridge we had crossed earlier. Realizing this might be our only chance, Sarah shouted, "Get across the bridge, now!" We barreled into the bridge, the van shaking under the strained boards. As we reached the halfway point, a deafening roar filled the air. Looking back, we saw the creature stop at the bridge's edge, with what looked to be an evil smirk, an image that still haunts me to this day. I'll even provide a drawing at the end if anybody wants to see it. After a few hours of driving, we finally left the woods and found the safety of the dim-lit streets of a nearby town. We pulled into a Waffle House, and we sat in a corner booth as we recounted the evening's events, trying to make sense of it all. Jennifer, her hands wrapped around her mug. "That old man, Togue," she began. "He knew too much about the whispering goat. Don't you think? There was agreement between us." I started rubbing my head and responded, "It's not just that he knew about it. Remember how he just appeared out of nowhere? And how, after he left, things immediately took a turn for the worse." The eyes of Sarah widened, and the way he emphasized not to trust familiar voices, almost like he was setting us up, giving us a clue about the thing we were about to face. Mike, looking more pale than usual, added, "When I was in the woods, trying to escape that thing, I heard more than our voices. I swear, I heard the voice of that old man calling me, trying to draw me in. I think he might have been the whispering goat himself." We all exchanged glances. The thought was too horrific to fully grasp. Had this creature taken on the look of an old man to toy with us, to get close, to study us? But why would he warn us about himself? It doesn't make sense, I said. Unless he enjoys the chase, the fear. Maybe for an old creature, the hunting is more thrilling, Luke said. We all sat in heavy silence, pondering the possibility as we pieced it all together. The sudden appearance of Togue, his detailed stories, and the haunting events. The conclusion became clear. The old man, with deep-set wrinkles and tales of old, had likely been the whispering goat himself. That happened a few months ago, and the trauma still lingers. First up was when we lost touch with Mike, who moved to another state, I guess to escape the memories. From that moment on, everything else changed. The once tight bonds between us frayed. Our group chats grew quiet, and any future gathering ceased. And the annual camping trip became nothing more than a distant memory. The haunting echoes of that night lingered, and every rustling of leaves, every faint whisper, served as a chilling reminder of the presence that lurked in the woods. The memory of the whispering goat and twisted grin haunted my dreams, a constant replay of the terror that unfolded before us. The mere thought of venturing into the wilderness sent shivers down my spine, a sensation of impending doom that I couldn't shake. As time passed, the memory of that horrifying encounter began to fade. We did all end up going separate ways, and I found methods to cope with the nightmares I experienced afterwards. I even went and talked with a counselor, because every corner that I looked, every voice I heard, at night when I was falling asleep, I swear, I would sometimes hear those faint whispers. Last night, I was walking alone in a park near my apartment. The sun had set, and the moon was shining bright. I quickened my pace as the nighttime brought back episodes and bad memories of the night in the forest. With my heart racing as the memories of that night flooded back, that's when I heard it. A faint distant sound that sent shivers down my spine. Whispers, soft, as if carried by the wind itself. I stopped in my tracks, straining to make out the words, feeling a cold sweat forming on my forehead. I heard my name, Leo. My heart raced, and my instincts screamed at me to run. But my feet felt rooted to the ground, and the whispering seemed to grow near. And then, I heard something else. A low, guttural growl, much like the one we had heard that night in the woods. Fear flooded my veins, and I finally tore my gaze away from the darkness, fleeing from the park as if my life depended on it, which at this point it most likely did. The whispers and the noises seemed to chase me, echoing in my ears, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being pursued. When I finally reached the safety of my home, I locked every door and window, heart pounding like a drum. I tried to rationalize what happened, telling myself it was all in my head, anxiety, and a product of what happened in the past in the woods. But deep down, I knew it was the whispering goat. As the night continued, I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being watched, that something evil lurked just beyond my vision. And just as I was about to close my eyes that night to try to sleep, I heard it again, the whispers, closer now, almost like a soft breath against my ear. Leo, Leo. My blood turned to ice, and I clutched my cover. And then, from the corner of my eye, I saw movement, a shadowy figure, its eyes reflecting the dim light like deep, soulless pits. The figure's mouth opened, and it spoke, its voice using all of my friends' voices, distorted and nightmarish.
We missed you, Leo.
With my eyes never leaving the figure, with trembling hands, I rushed to the front door, my heart pounding so loud that I couldn't even hear anything else. And then, just as I reached past the door, I heard one last whisper, faint but unmistakable. Run. I bursted out the house, leaving everything behind. I got inside my old trusted van and sped away to my parents' house, who lived about 2 hours away. And I never went back again. It's almost midnight. I'm at my parents' house, and here I am, sharing and writing this to you all, in the hopes to warn you. Everything is real. It's not in my head, and it's still out there, waiting in the shadows, whispering its haunting lullaby. Those moments when you second guess a distant call your name, when you are alone at home tonight, in bed, falling asleep. Do not be swayed by the voices that you think you know.